It's been a year since the first episode of Books and Brew, and I'm really excited to see the podcast grow over this first year. It started with only one listener, which is me, and the response I see at the end of season 1 humbles me and motivates me to keep bringing out more episodes. So while I work on season 2, I'd like to rerun the episode on Dictator's Handbook this month. While India is going through a horrible second wave of COVID, and it's highly commendable that its citizens are going out of their way to help others in need and performing what essentially is government's responsibility, it's necessary to sit back and analyze why we ended up in such a situation. How come our government is incompetent? Or is it on purpose that the government takes its citizens for granted? Check this episode and think about why our politicians do what they do. So stay tuned. News from politics that we see and read today from around the world is just baffling, isn't it? Some questions that we can't help but ask are, how do dictators hold on to the power for their entire lifetime? And why are countries with all the might and power so unprepared when an emergency hits them? We see that today in United States, in India, in many other countries. How come countries with rich natural resources have most of its citizens stricken with poverty? That's majority of Africa. How come one of the most educated and developed country in the world decides to not believe in the science of global warming? Baffling, right? And how on earth a country teaching the world the idea of non-violence through its freedom struggle has changed to a country willing to kill its own citizens on the basis of what food they eat? And don't think that these stories are restricted only to the world of politics. They go deep into our industries as well. Don't you wonder how CEOs get handsomely paid while their company and the shareholders lose all their money in an economic recession? In today's episode, let's try and understand why these rulers do what they do. Welcome to Books and Brew, and I'm your host Mayur Ghatge. And today I'll talk about a book called Dictator's Handbook, written by Bruce DeMesquita and Alistair Smith. I'll talk about 3 ideas from the book and try to convince all the listeners to go and read it. It's not a book only for students of political science. Rather, it's a must read for everyone to understand the game of politics. And even if you aren't playing it, knowing these rules of the game will at least save you from being played by. The first idea from the book that I'd like to talk about is the idea that no leader is monolithic, meaning no leader whatsoever can govern alone. Such a ruler does not, has not, and cannot exist. No emperor, no king, no sheikh, no tyrant, no CEO, not even a family head can rule alone. All of these rulers need supporters and they are essential. And the author here in this book divides these types of supporters into 3 different categories. First are the interchangeables, which includes every person who has at least some legal say in choosing their leader. So, in a democracy, these are citizens who vote. In a large publicly traded companies, these are millions of shareholders who have their stocks. The second category of supporters are the influentials. So in China, this will be the member of the Communist Party who choose the leader. In Saudi, it will be the senior royal family members. In democracies like India with parliamentary system, this will be the member of the majority party in the parliament. In the United States, it will be the electoral college, but since they typically vote what the citizens vote for, they are not that important. In corporations, big institutional shareholders like mutual funds, banks, insurance companies fall into this category. The third subcategory of supporters are called essentials. These are the people whose support is essential for the leader to not just come in power but also survive in office. These are the folks with the power to overthrow their boss, and he knows it. In the United States, the winning coalition is vastly larger, or the essentials are vastly larger. It consists of minimal number of voters who give the edge to one presidential candidate over the other. You can consider swing states into this category. For autocrats, essentials are typically a handful of people in the court or military or the civil servants. And in a corporation, these are senior management and the board members. So, the difference in the size of the category of supporters across the state or business make up the type of governance in the organization or the state. One end of this spectrum is a total democratic system, while the other end is a dictatorial regime. So, I'd like the listeners to give up on the black and white concept or the idea of autocrats versus democrats, right versus left, but just look at any ruler as someone who is backed by these three subcategory of supporters, be it interchangeables, influentials, and essentials. And it's very easy to remember. Interchangeables, as the word says, can be replaced. Influentials are the ones who influence any rulers coming into power. And essentials are basically, as the word says, essential for the ruler to be in power for a long time. And as the ratio of these three subcategory of supporter changes, a ruler becomes more democratic or an autocratic depending on what suits him to stay in power and be in power for a long time. Higher the number of influentials and essentials means more democratic the system, and lower the size, more autocratic the system is. So, what it essentially means is if there are more people on whom you or any ruler has to depend on, you become more democratic because you have to think about the larger good of the people. And if you have to just depend on few cronies or few handful of your military generals, then you don't really have to keep the entire population happy. That's how the autocratic system works. And why I said to give up on the black and white concept of an autocratic nation or a democratic nation can be explained from an example from today's world of politics. We see so many alpha males ruling major quote unquote democratic nations, be it Narendra Modi in India, Bolsonaro in Brazil, or Xi Jinping in China. On the other side of the spectrum is Kim Jong un of North Korea, or Mohammed bin Salman, or MBS as is popularly known as, from Saudi Arabia. All these nations that I listed range from capitalist to socialist to a family run kingdom. But what is common between these rulers of democratic and autocratic nations is that their current leadership have some autocratic instincts within them. So, this clearly explains why looking at any country as a democratic and autocratic nation doesn't really help. So, try instilling a habit to not look at these leaders by the conventional political divides we are taught, but through the size of supporters that they have. So, depending on the size and combinations of these three subgroup of supporters, any country can become democratic and autocratic and vice versa. Dictatorship really means a government that is based on particularly small number of essentials drawn from a very large group of interchangeables, and usually a relatively small batch of influentials. On the other hand, when we talk about democracy, what we really mean is a government founded by a large number of essentials and a very large number of interchangeables, with the influential group being almost as big as the interchangeable group. We must remember that labels like democracy or dictatorship are just convenience. The authors introduce this idea of three different types of supporters very well in the book, with a lot of examples from the past and current political establishments as well as large corporations like HP. Once you read the first few chapters, you'll get a very good hold, an idea of why your current leader does and says things which are not beneficial for larger good of the society. For example, in India, when Narendra Modi allows the Kumbh Mela to go on as it was scheduled, irrespective of the coronavirus, it's only because he knows that majority of his supporters, which are belonging to the Hindu religion, will support this decision. And so he doesn't really care about the science or the repercussions of letting this Kumbh Mela go through. While it was his government that filed FIR against a lot of Muslim clerics who were probably the first super spreaders in India for coronavirus last year. And I'm not trying to justify, even they were wrong, but then they didn't have the political backing how the Kumbh Mela has today. You can also apply these learnings from the first few chapters to even the corporate world. For example, as we all still remember, the famous or infamous removal of Cyrus Mistry from the chairmanship of Tata Sons. Now, we all respect Ratan Tata as a great visionary and a businessman, and probably a very good person as well. But even though in such a situation, he did an autocratic removal of Cyrus Mistry. And later, Cyrus Mistry won the case in the court. But Ratan Tata did what he did to stay in power or to have his hold on the power. You see, it's not about the person being good or bad. He does what he does to stay in power. So, whenever we see any autocratic move done by a politician or anyone from the world of industry, we should not really focus on the individual himself. We should try to look at the system that gave him the powers and the means to do it. And this is what the authors try to show in this book. They want to instill the idea that we should come up with a system so that the politician or the leader depends on a large number of interchangeables and a large number of essentials. This is the only way he would think of the larger good of the society and not about himself. And that's how you could come up with a society that's more democratic, not by just having elections. Like, as we all know, there are elections in Russia, but nobody believes it's democratic, right? Also, look at our family system, right? As women start going out, working, and being independent, and the man starts needing the woman's help to run the family, that's when we'll start going away from patriarchy. So it's not the individual, but the system makes the person autocratic or democratic. The second idea I'd like to touch upon from the book is the discussion about foreign aid. Most of us would like to believe that foreign aid is giving help to impoverished people and countries. The United States Agency for International Development, USAID, is the primary organization for allocating US aid internationally, and it advertises itself, and I quote, extending a helping hand to those people overseas struggling to make a better life, recover from disaster, or strive to live in a free and a democratic country. Stress on the word democratic, by the way. It is this caring that stands as the hallmark of United States around the world. Stop quote. But there is no shortage of instances where the aid is misappropriated and misdirected by the recipient governments, right? We all know, for example, United States gave Pakistan $6.6 billion in military aid to combat the Taliban between 2001 and 2008, and only 500 million is estimated to have ever reached the army. And it is hard to believe that agencies are so naive as to not understand that the funds are misused. Perhaps the truth lies in another aim of USAID, and I quote, furthering America's foreign policy interest. Stop quote. So basically, USAID, in the name of giving funds to impoverished countries to fight against poverty or let's say terrorism, is actually trying to give the money to countries so that they can become their allies in the world of globalization. The authors give a lot of examples of foreign aids given in the past and even currently to explain what was the inherent motive behind any country to give aid to a foreign nation. One of the hidden agendas in the USAID's motive is to spread democracy across the world, and we all know the mess that has created in the Middle East by forcing a democratic system on the population. Any system, if it has to change from an autocratic to democratic, the authors believe that it has to come from within the society and not imposed on them. It never works and it never will. The third and final idea from the book that I'd like to touch upon can be summed up in one single sentence, and it goes something like this. The main objective of politics is not ruling well, it's just ruling so that you can have yourself and your essential supporters taken care of. That's it. So, any policy that any government makes is made in such a way that it benefits the essential supporters, because the leader knows that if the essentials are not happy, he can be thrown out. And that's very important lesson. So, in any organization or a country you're part of, try to drive the system so that the number of essentials that a leader needs to stay in power becomes as big as possible. Bigger the set of essentials, more democratic and more fair the system is. To wrap up the discussion on this book, apart from the three ideas that I discussed, there are a bunch of different concepts that have been explained, like what the ruler has to do to come in power and how does it differ in a democratic government or in an autocratic system. what the ruler has to do to stay in power in respective governments or in an organization. It also talks about how war has played a role for a ruler to stay in power or go out of power, and how his physical health also makes a huge difference for him to continue ruling the world. At the end of the book, the authors try to come up with some ideas how it can be done right and what are the things that need to be fixed to make the system work. As I said earlier in the episode, I highly recommend this book to everyone. And everyone should read it not because of their liking for politics, but just to understand how the leaders of their own country or their organization take any decision that affect them. It's rated at about 4.29 on Goodreads, and I'm pretty certain you would not be disappointed after reading this. Do let me know how do you find this episode. For more such episodes of Books and Brew, tune into my YouTube channel or subscribe to the show on any of the podcasting apps that you use. Until season 2 begins, spread the word, keep reading, and happy listening.